Welcome back to part 3 of our Explainer series. We're continuing to tackle that massive question. Were the Vikings really the brutal savages history remembers? Or something far more complicated? To start finding out, I want you to picture this. Holy Island, Northumberland. The monks of Lindisfarne are waking up to a morning just like any other. It's warm, the air is crisp, carrying that salty smell of the sea. The gentle chanting of morning prayers is creating this deep, sacred peace right across the monastery. But then, someone looks out over the water. And that calm? It is completely shattered. Low in the water, moving incredibly fast, these unfamiliar ships appear on the horizon. And they're heading straight for the island. Within just a few hours, the most sacred monastery in all of England was burning. I want you to mark this date because absolutely everything changed on the 8th of June, 793 AD. On this exact day, the Viking Age in Britain officially began. So why Lindisfarne? Well, from the Norse perspective, this place ticked literally every single box. It was founded way back in 635 AD by Saint Aidan. That means it had over 150 years to just accumulate unimaginable treasure, wealth, and incredibly precious items. But here's the absolute kicker. It was incredibly isolated, sitting right off the coast, and it had zero defenses. No stone walls, no garrison of trained soldiers, not even a warning system, just monks living their quiet lives. For raiders arriving in shallow draft longships, which, by the way, were these incredible vessels specially designed to glide right up onto the sandy beach without getting stuck, this monastery was the absolute perfect target. Now, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is our main English written record for these events, actually recorded fiery dragons flying over Northumbria right before the raid. I know, it sounds straight out of a fantasy movie, right? But the reality is, these were almost certainly the Northern Lights. The local people were just so traumatized by the violence that followed, they looked back and misinterpreted a perfectly natural weather phenomenon as this terrifying divine omen of doom. Which brings us to one of the most important historical voices from that exact time. Listen closely to this. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain, as we have now suffered from a pagan race. Let that really sink in. That was written by Alcuin of York. He was an incredibly important scholar and a top advisor to the mighty Emperor Charlemagne, the most powerful ruler in all of Europe. Alcuin didn't just see this as a violent robbery. He viewed it as a direct, divine punishment for England's sins. Now, this is where we have to put on our historical detective hats and look at content versus provenance. Content is simply what the words themselves say. And the content of Alcuin's letter? It absolutely drips with horror, grief, and total devastation. But what about the provenance? Provenance is a historian's word for exactly where a source comes from and who wrote it. And this is huge, guys. Alcuin wasn't even at Lindisfarne. He was hundreds of miles away, sitting safely in Charlemagne's court, grieving this horrific attack on his deeply held faith. So his provenance heavily shaped his content. That doesn't mean we just dismiss his letter. No way. But it means we absolutely have to read it carefully, keeping in mind his massive emotional investment and the fact that he was writing from a place of deep shock and distance. So what's the big takeaway here? Why does this single raid matter so much? First, it completely exposed England's catastrophic vulnerability. They had absolutely no navy to fight back at sea and no coastal warning system to protect their shores. Second, it sent absolute shockwaves through the entirety of Christian Europe, because it violently violated a sacred space that everyone believed was under divine protection. And third, and this is a really massive takeaway for us, our entire history of this event is written by the victims. Horrified monks and distant scholars wrote the history books, completely framing the Norsemen in the worst possible light.
Part 2. 2 interesting facts. Fact number 1. The number 715. Way back around 715 AD, a monk named Eadfrith created the Lindisfarne Gospels. It's this absolutely stunning illuminated manuscript, basically a spectacularly handwritten book decorated with brilliant colors and real gold. Unbelievably, whether it was cleverly hidden or just ignored by the raiders, it survived the attack. And today, you don't even need to travel to the British Library to see it. Every single page of this incredible medieval treasure has been digitized and can be viewed online for free. The great treasure of the most raided monastery in history is literally available right now to anyone with a phone.
Fact number 2, 650,000. So Lindisfarne is still a tidal island today, meaning it gets completely cut off by the sea at high tide. And yet, modern drivers constantly ignore the tide tables and get their cars completely trapped in the incoming water every single year.
But despite those tidal traps, it welcomes over 650,000 visitors annually. The site of history's most notorious terrifying raid is now one of England's absolute most popular tourist destinations.
Part 3, knowledge check. All right, let's see what you remember. I'm going to read the question and the options aloud, and you will have exactly 4 seconds to lock in your answer. Let's jump in. Question 1. When was Lindisfarne raided and why was it so vulnerable? Is it A, 25th of December, 800 AD because it had a small garrison? B, 8th of June, 793 AD because it was isolated, wealthy, accessible by sea, and completely undefended? C, 15th of August, 801 AD because it was on a major trade route? Or D, 1st of January, 793 AD because the monks were asleep?
Correct. The answer is B. Lindisfarne was raided on the 8th of June, 793 AD because Holy Island was the absolute perfect target, with direct sea access, incredible wealth, and zero defenses.
Question 2. Who was Alcuin, and what did he write about the raid? A, a Viking chieftain who wrote a boastful account. B, a surviving monk on Lindisfarne. C, a scholar to Charlemagne who described it as divine punishment. Or D, the king of Northumbria. 4-second pause. Correct. It is answer C. Alcuin was a brilliant scholar to Charlemagne who interpreted the raid as a punishment from God, revealing exactly how medieval people understood catastrophic events through the lens of human sin.
Question 3. What were the fiery dragons reported in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle right before the raid? A, actual dragons the Norse brought with them? B, Viking longships with burning torches? C, misinterpreted northern lights? Or D, a volcanic eruption?
Correct. The answer is C. They were almost certainly the aurora borealis, the northern lights, totally misinterpreted by locals who were desperately searching for divine omens. Question 4. Why is Alcuin's letter considered a useful but potentially biased source? A, it was written 300 years after the events. B, he was a North convert who changed sides. C, his provenance as a distant, grieving Christian shapes his emphasis. Or D, he only wrote about trade. Correct. The answer is C. His provenance truly matters here because he was an emotionally invested scholar far from the scene, proving that reading historical accounts requires understanding the writer's personal position. Final question, question 5. Where are the Lindisfarne Gospels today and why do they matter? A, they were destroyed in the raid. B, they are in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. C, they are in the British Library in London, containing the first gospel translation into an English language. Or D, they are still on Lindisfarne. Correct. The answer is C. Created by the monk Eadfrith around 715 AD, they are sitting safely in the British Library in London and contain the very first translation of any gospel into an English language. So we've explored the spark that lit the Viking Age in Britain, and we've seen the sheer horror through the victim's eyes. But doing great historical detective work leaves us with an incredible mystery. Why did the Vikings raid in the first place? And were they really as brutal as the sources suggest? Well, that is exactly what we will uncover next time.